Welcome back to my channel, where real story takes its time. Let's get into it.
I'm Charles, 33, and if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said my family wasn't perfect, but we loved each other. At least, that's what I told myself every time I felt the familiar sting of being left out of family plans or laughed at for being too generous. I was the one who fixed things, paid for dinners, handled bills when someone forgot their wallet, and answered late-night calls for just one small favor. It wasn't that I had endless money. I worked hard running my small construction business, but I genuinely believed helping my family was a way of keeping us close. Maybe that's naive, but I grew up thinking loyalty was supposed to mean something. My mom, Denise, was the type who liked control more than connection. She ran every conversation, cut people off mid-sentence, and treated my accomplishments like cute hobbies rather than something to be proud of. My sister, Melissa, 29, followed in her footsteps in more ways than I liked to admit. She learned early how to play the part, sweet and innocent around me, sharp and mocking behind my back. And then there was my Aunt Kathy, my mom's sister, who treated me like her personal ATM wrapped in guilt trips and family nostalgia. They'd all thank me profusely when I helped them out, showering me with words like, "You're such a good son, Charles," or "You've always had the biggest heart," and then vanish until the next crisis. I always told myself they meant well. I really did. It started becoming harder to believe that after my dad passed. He'd been the only one who really saw me, who'd pull me aside during family dinners and say, "Don't let them take advantage of that kindness of yours." After he died, the calls from Mom and Melissa didn't stop. They increased. It was like they saw me as some sort of emotional and financial insurance policy. My mom's electric bill slipped through the cracks. Melissa needed help with her car payment because her boss was late sending checks. My aunt wanted to start a side business selling scented candles and needed an investment partner. I kept telling myself it was fine. That family helps family. But each time I wired money, there was this quiet ache that I tried not to listen to. It was that same ache I used to feel when I was a kid, saving up my allowance to buy Mom something nice, only for her to tell me I should have saved it for something useful. Then came the group chat. It was just called family, though the heart emoji felt like a bad joke even before I found out what was really going on. The group had Mom, Melissa, Aunt Kathy, and me in it. They used it mostly to coordinate holidays, share memes, and occasionally remind me of something I'd offered to help with. I never said no. I didn't know how. Saying no always ended with guilt, the kind that felt like you were betraying some unspoken rule of being a good son or brother. But about 3 months ago, that illusion shattered in the strangest way. It was a Tuesday night. I just finished dinner and was checking my phone when I saw a notification from Melissa. She'd sent me something, a screenshot. At first, I thought it was meant for me. It showed the family group chat. I scrolled up, confused, until I realized what I was reading wasn't from tonight. It was a private conversation, one I wasn't supposed to see. My stomach tightened as I read line by line. Aunt Kathy had written, "He's so gullible, he'll pay for anything if you flatter him. Honestly, it's pathetic how hard he tries to be needed." Then Mom replied, "I know. It's like he thinks money equals love. Poor thing never learned that not everyone's desperate for his help." Melissa chimed in, "Well, let's not ruin a good thing. I'm getting new tires tomorrow thanks to him. He actually said, 'Don't worry about paying me back.' Like, okay if you say so." I just stared at the screen. My food sat untouched as I read it over and over, each line cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the cruelty behind the words, the ease with which they joked about me. All those moments I'd spent worrying about them, making sure they were okay, driving hours to fix things around their homes. It was all just a running joke to them. And that laugh emoji from Melissa burned itself into my mind like a scar. I didn't respond that night. I didn't even confront her. I just sat there, reading the screenshot until my phone dimmed. My first instinct was disbelief. Maybe it was taken out of context, I told myself. Maybe it was old. But then I saw the timestamp. It was sent that morning, hours before Melissa had called to ask if I could cover her internet bill just until payday. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying every favor, every thank you. every fake smile. The next morning, I woke up feeling something unfamiliar, calm, but cold, detached. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity. I scrolled through my messages and read the latest ones from each of them. Mom had sent a photo of a new bracelet she bought, writing, "Isn't it beautiful? Your aunt helped me pick it." The same aunt who had called me pathetic less than 24 hours ago. Melissa had texted, "Love you, big bro. You're seriously the best. I'll pay you back soon, promise." I didn't reply to either. Over the next few days, the silence must have confused them. Usually, I was the first to respond, to offer help, to ask if they needed anything. I started noticing the shift. Mom messaged me, "Haven't heard from you much lately. Everything okay?" Then came one from Kathy. "Hey, sweetie, any chance you could spot me for groceries this week? Promise I'll pay you back Friday." Melissa followed with, "Charles, did you get my message? I really need your help. Please call me." I didn't call. I didn't send money. I just watched. That's when I noticed something interesting. Without my constant support, small cracks started showing in their perfect little circle. Mom began guilt-tripping me more aggressively, claiming she didn't know what she did wrong, but that I was hurting her feelings by ignoring her. Melissa got passive-aggressive, posting memes about selfish family members who forget who was there for them. Aunt Kathy, predictably, tried to guilt me with nostalgia. "Your dad would be disappointed to see you pushing us away like this." That one nearly got to me. Nearly. Because the truth is, my dad wouldn't have been disappointed. He warned me, again and again, that they'd use me if I let them. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. But now I could see it with perfect clarity. Every smile, every favor, every "you're such a good son" was just a tool. I'd been the reliable one, the fixer, the easy mark. And the worst part? They didn't even respect me for it. I started making quiet changes. Logged out of the family group chat, muted notifications, and redirected my energy elsewhere. My company had been growing. I'd taken on 2 new contracts, which meant more work, more stress, but also more control. For the first time, I focused on myself instead of being their safety net. And I didn't tell them a word. They didn't need to know how much my business had expanded or how much money I'd saved by not bailing them out. Then, about a week later, something strange happened. I got a flurry of texts, missed calls, and voicemails, all within an hour. It started with Melissa. "Charles, Mom's freaking out. Please call her." Then from Mom, "Everything's going wrong. I need your help now." Aunt Kathy, "Sweetie, something's wrong with my account. Can you check if the payments went through?" That calm feeling returned. I opened my banking app and saw nothing unusual on my end, but I had a pretty good idea what they meant. I scrolled through the messages as they kept coming, desperate, panicked, all of them suddenly remembering my number. And as I read each one, a slow, quiet thought formed in the back of my mind, one that carried none of the guilt or hesitation that used to define me. This time, it was going to be different. This time, I wasn't going to fix it for them. And that's exactly when everything began to change. I didn't respond that day or the next. My phone kept buzzing. Calls from Mom, texts from Melissa, voice notes from Aunt Kathy filled with dramatic sighs, and the occasional sniffle for effect. I let them sit unread for a while, part of me curious how long it would take before the sweet tone disappeared. It didn't take long. The messages turned sharp. Mom accused me of being ungrateful, of forgetting who raised you. Melissa claimed I was being cruel for not helping when she really needed me. Aunt Kathy reminded me, multiple times, that family shouldn't keep score. The irony made me laugh out loud in my kitchen one morning, coffee cup in hand. The same people who kept me on a leash of guilt were now shocked the leash had snapped. Still, I didn't say anything. I wanted to see just how deep their entitlement ran when the money stopped flowing. By the end of the week, the silence between us had grown louder than ever before. Normally, there would have been a family dinner by now, an excuse for them to circle around me, smile sweetly, and drop small hints about their latest problems. This time, no invitation came. Instead, Melissa posted a long, cryptic rant on Facebook about fake family members who act like they're better than everyone else once they make a little money. The comments were exactly what she wanted. Friends sympathizing, saying things like, "You deserve better," girl. And some people forget where they came from. I didn't reply, but I saw Mom like the post. That one stung a little. I thought maybe she'd at least try to stay neutral, but apparently, that wasn't her style. Later that evening, she finally broke the silence with a call. I stared at her name flashing on my screen for a good 30 seconds before answering. "Charles," she said, her tone tight, like she'd been practicing. "Are you mad at me?" I leaned against the counter. "Why would I be mad?" "Well, you've been distant. I don't know what's going on, but you're worrying me." "You mean because I didn't pay Melissa's internet bill?" She sighed, that long, exaggerated sigh that always preceded a guilt trip. "You know that's not what I meant. It's not about money, honey. It's about family. You're shutting us out." "I just needed some space," I said, keeping my tone even. "I've been busy with work." "Oh, work?" she said, the way she always said it, like my job was an inconvenient hobby. "You're always working. Maybe if you weren't so focused on your company, you'd notice that your family needs you." That was her subtle way of saying, "We only value you when you're useful." "Mom," I said quietly, "do you ever stop to think about how much I've done for everyone lately? Or how often I get asked for help, compared to how often anyone just asks how I'm doing?" There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the faint clinking of her bracelet through the phone. "Charles," she said finally, her voice softening into the tone she used when she wanted to control the conversation. "You've always been such a generous boy. That's one of the things I love most about you. Don't let anyone make you bitter. You're not like that." I felt my jaw tighten. "Bitter? Yes, sweetie. You sound angry. And that's not you." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That was the last time I answered her calls for a while. Over the next couple of weeks, things got worse. I started hearing from mutual friends that my family had been talking, twisting the story, making me sound like some heartless miser who'd turned his back on them. Mom told people I was having some kind of midlife crisis. Aunt Kathy claimed I'd been acting strange since Dad died. Melissa, never one to stay subtle, said flat out that I was greedy now. It was almost impressive how quickly they turned me into the villain. At first, it bothered me. I'd built my life around being dependable, the good son, the good brother, the one who came through. But now that I was saying no, that same reliability was being rewritten as arrogance. Still, beneath the sting, I felt something else, relief. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn their approval. One Saturday afternoon, I ran into Aunt Kathy at the grocery store. I was grabbing some things for the week when I heard her unmistakable voice behind me. "Well, if it isn't our little ghost," she said, smiling too wide. "Haven't seen you around lately." "Hi, Aunt Kathy." She put a hand on her hip. "You know, your mother's been worried sick. You don't call, you don't visit, and you're ignoring messages. What's going on, Charles?" I shrugged. "Just been busy." She leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. "Listen, I don't know what's gotten into you, but family doesn't turn their back on each other. We all hit rough patches. Your mom's credit card got declined last week, and your sister's been in tears over her car payment. You could have helped. That's what family's for." There it was, no shame, no awareness, just the expectation that I should fix things. "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said, turning to leave. "Charles." Her voice sharpened. "Your father would be disappointed in how you're treating your family." I froze for half a second. That line, "your father would be disappointed," had always been her trump card. But this time, it didn't land. I looked at her and said quietly, "Dad warned me about this exact thing." She blinked, her smile faltering for the first time. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, grabbing my bag. "You'll be fine, Aunt Kathy. You always are." I walked away before she could respond. That night, I got a long message from Mom. "I can't believe you embarrassed Kathy in public like that. She was only trying to help you see how selfish you've been. What happened to my sweet boy?" Sweet boy, the phrase she always used when she wanted to guilt me. I didn't reply. As days passed, their situation started unraveling. Melissa's car got repossessed. I knew because she posted a crying selfie on social media with a caption about fake people who don't care when you're down. Mom's utilities got cut off temporarily, which she announced in the group chat with a dramatic message about karma coming for the wrong people. Aunt Kathy had some kind of bank issue that caused her rent check to bounce. They were all spiraling, but instead of helping each other, they turned on me like vultures. At one point, Melissa showed up at my house unannounced. I opened the door and saw her standing there in tears, clutching her phone. "Why are you doing this?" she said. "We're your family, Charles. You can't just abandon us." "Abandon?" I asked. "You mean I stopped paying your bills?" "You don't understand," she said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "Mom's losing it. Aunt Kathy's freaking out. We're all falling apart, and you're just calm. It's weird." I stayed by the door. "You guys made it clear what you think of me." "I saw the messages, Melissa." Her face went pale. "What messages?" "The ones you accidentally sent me from the group chat." Her eyes darted away, and for a split second, the guilt was there before she tried to cover it with indignation. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said softly. "Yeah," I replied. "I figured that out." She crossed her arms. "You're taking it too seriously. It was just a joke. We didn't mean it." "A joke," I repeated. "You called me pathetic for trying to be needed." She flinched. We were venting. You take everything so literally." For a moment, I just stared at her. The same person who used to call me the best brother in the world now stood in my living room, minimizing the betrayal like it was nothing. "I'm done, Melissa," I said finally. "I'm not your ATM. I'm not Mom's fixer. And I'm not Aunt Kathy's safety net. You guys have treated me like a tool, not a person." She scoffed. "You're overreacting. No one else in this family has ever had a problem helping." "Because no one else ever does help," I said. "It's always me." She stared at me for a long moment, then muttered, "You're going to regret this." I watched her leave without saying another word. That night, the group chat exploded again. Mom accused me of breaking Melissa's heart. Aunt Kathy wrote, "You're acting like a stranger, Charles. We're worried about you." Then came the guilt. "Do you know how hard it is for a mother to watch her only son turn cold?" I muted the chat and turned off my phone. But deep down, something inside me had shifted permanently. Their manipulation wasn't working anymore. The shame, the guilt, the obligation, all of it was losing power. For the first time, I saw them clearly for who they were. And that clarity brought a strange, steady calm. It all came to a head one Monday morning, the kind where the sun rises slowly and the quiet before work should feel calm. But I could already sense tension in the air. I had just finished my usual breakfast, black coffee and toast, when my phone buzzed incessantly. By the time I glanced down, I had 30 notifications stacked up, missed calls, texts, voicemails. My thumb hovered over the first unread message from Mom. Normally, I would have answered immediately. Today, I didn't. I let it sit. The messages were frantic. "Charles, please, you have to help us. We didn't mean it. We can't survive without you. This is all your fault. You're supposed to be the responsible one." I scrolled slowly, letting each word sink in, savoring the mixture of panic and entitlement. I had been waiting for this, the exact moment where they realized that their entire safety net had disappeared. But nothing had prepared me for the final betrayal. It was Melissa. She had shown up at my house again, but this time, she wasn't alone. I opened the door to see her standing with a man I didn't recognize, tall, in a sharp suit, holding a briefcase. Behind him, Melissa was smiling in that manipulative way I'd learned to recognize over the years. All innocence, all charm, completely rehearsed. "Charles," she said sweetly, stepping aside to let him in. "This is someone who can help. Don't worry. He's professional." I raised an eyebrow. "Professional?" "Yes," Melissa said, her voice dripping honey. "He's a financial consultant. He can help sort out everything. He's authorized by Mom to speak for the family." My stomach dropped. "Wait, authorized by Mom?" She nodded vigorously. "Yes. Everything's been so stressful. We just want to make sure everything is handled properly." I wanted to ask why I hadn't been consulted, why she thought showing up unannounced with a stranger was acceptable, but the man in the suit started speaking, pulling out papers and a tablet. "Good morning, Charles," he said smoothly. "I've been retained by your family to discuss outstanding obligations and set up a repayment plan. We've noticed some discrepancies in your usual support." I blinked. "Discrepancies?" "Yes," the man said. Apparently, funds that have historically been allocated to family expenses have not been received. I'm here to formalize a plan to bring everything back in line. I stared at Melissa. You hired someone to track me? To manage my money for you? She tilted her head, playing the role of hurt sibling perfectly. Charles, it's just to make things easier. You always stress so much, and we just wanted to help. You wouldn't want us to struggle, would you? I felt my chest tighten. My parents had always told me that family meant trust, that we were supposed to protect each other, that blood meant loyalty. But here was Melissa, and by extension Mom and Aunt Kathy, openly trying to manipulate and control me using legal authority and strangers. I realized then that their sense of entitlement had gone beyond jokes, beyond emotional manipulation. They were weaponizing my generosity, trying to formalize it. I can't believe this, I said, my voice low. You literally conspired to monitor me like I'm some kind of asset you own. Melissa flinched as if I'd slapped her. It's not like that. She faltered, searching for an excuse. We just want what's fair. For all of us. I shook my head, feeling the slow burn of betrayal spread across my chest. Fair? Is that what you call it? After years of mocking me, of laughing at me behind my back, you call this fair? The financial man cleared his throat. Perhaps it would be productive if we— No. I snapped, cutting him off. You don't get to say anything. Not here. Not to me. You've been hired by people who have literally been laughing at me and exploiting me. And now you think they can just send you into my home to enforce some fantasy of fairness. Melissa's eyes welled up with tears, staged and perfect. Charles, please. You're making this so much harder than it needs to be. We're just trying to help. Help? I laughed, though it came out bitter and sharp. Melissa, you've never tried to help me. You've taken every favor, every act of kindness, and turned it into a joke about how gullible I am. And now you're trying to control me legally. That's not help. That's theft, emotional, financial, and moral. Her smile faltered slightly. Charles, I'm done listening to excuses, I said. Done with manipulation. Done with betrayal. I turned to the man in the suit. You can tell my family that I don't consent to anything you're doing here. They've overstepped every boundary imaginable. And if they think a piece of paper can force me to hand over money to people who openly mock me, they are sorely mistaken. The man's calm demeanor wavered slightly. I understand. I'll relay the message. Melissa's tears turned into a flash of frustration. Charles, you can't just refuse. You're being selfish. This is about all of us. All of us. I echoed, my voice rising. You mean about all of you taking from me? You mean about all of you laughing at me, expecting me to fund your lives while pretending I'm the problem? All of you are grown adults. If you can't manage your own finances without my constant intervention, that's your problem, not mine. Her hands shook slightly, the first crack in her performance. You don't get it. Mom's credit card. I cut her off. I get it perfectly. You're entitled. You're greedy. And you've never respected me. You've never thought about what I want, or what I need, or how it feels to be constantly drained by the people who are supposed to love you. And now, instead of trying to communicate like adults, you bring a stranger into my home to enforce your will. Melissa's face was pale now, the tears gone, replaced by pure shock. For the first time in years, I saw the raw truth behind her polished mask, fear. She didn't know how to manipulate me anymore because I had finally recognized the game. The man in the suit cleared his throat again, nervously shuffling papers. Perhaps another time. Another time? I said. No, not another time. You don't get to enter my life to control me. You don't get to weaponize money or guilt or legal threats. Leave. Now. Melissa hesitated, glancing at the man as if seeking guidance. When he took a step back, she realized I wasn't moving, wasn't backing down. She tried one last gambit. Charles, please. Think about the family. Don't you want to keep us together? I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw every lie I had swallowed for decades. Every fake smile, every manipulative hug, every plea for help that was really a demand. I felt my own heart tighten, not in pain, but in cold, sharp clarity. I have thought about family, I said slowly, deliberately, and I've realized something important. Family isn't just a title. It's respect, loyalty, trust. And none of you have ever given me those things. You've only taken. You've only mocked. And now, after everything, you think you can manipulate me with a suit and papers. You're wrong. Melissa's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Aunt Kathy's voice appeared on my voicemail later that evening, frantic and trembling, but I didn't listen. I just sat in my apartment, thinking about the betrayal, about how far they had gone, about how carefully, collectively, they had tried to orchestrate a system to control me. And that was when I realized it. Nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't go back to being the good son, the easy brother, the dependable family member who was always there to fix everything. That door had closed the moment they showed up with a stranger, attempting to legalize the very mockery and manipulation I'd endured my whole life. I felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. Fear because I knew what they would do next, the desperation would get worse. And liberation because for the first time, I wasn't going to respond the way they expected. I went to bed that night knowing that a storm was coming, and this time, I wouldn't be the one carrying it for them. After that confrontation with Melissa and the so-called financial consultant, I thought the storm had passed. I was wrong. The next week brought a chaos I hadn't anticipated, but somehow, it fueled me instead of breaking me. Mom's texts turned manic. Aunt Kathy left 5 voicemails in one morning, all variations of "Charles, I'm begging you. We're desperate. You have to help us." Melissa tried social media like a second assault, posting vague, self-pitying stories about a brother who refuses to support family. Every notification made me flinch at first, a part of me longing for the old pattern, the calls, the guilt, the opportunity to fix things. But that part of me had been buried, and deep down, I knew I would never go back. It was like hitting rock bottom, except the thing crushing me wasn't external. It was knowing that my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had spent years mocking me behind my back, laughing at my generosity, plotting to control me, and now were panicking because I refused to play my assigned role. The sting was real, and it wasn't something I could fix by pretending to be oblivious anymore. It was humbling and isolating, but it was also strangely clarifying. I stayed quiet for days. I let them flounder. I didn't answer calls. I didn't read most of the texts, only the occasional glance to gauge their desperation. And the more they descended into chaos, the more I realized how much control I had been giving them for years. They thrived on my obedience, my guilt, my desire to be needed. Without it, they were rudderless. At first, the silence was hard. I felt pangs of guilt creeping in, like old instincts trying to pull me back into the loop of good son behavior. I'd been conditioned for decades to respond, to repair, to smooth over, to take on the emotional weight of everyone else's life. Walking away felt unnatural, even cruel. I would lie awake at night thinking, am I doing the right thing? Is this too much? Am I being selfish? But the clarity never left me. The moment they showed up with that stranger, attempting to manipulate me legally, was the moment I realized this wasn't about me being selfish. It was about them exploiting me for decades. Slowly, I began reclaiming my life. I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I stopped worrying about whether they were happy or comfortable. Work became my anchor. I had contracts waiting, and I buried myself in projects that required attention to detail, long hours, and problem solving. Things that rewarded me tangibly for my effort. For the first time in years, I wasn't giving all my energy away to people who saw me as disposable. At first, it was exhausting. I was still carrying the emotional residue of their betrayal. I'd find myself staring at my reflection, asking, did I really deserve that? But then I'd think of the group chat screenshot, the comments about gullibility, the staged tears, the attempt to weaponize legal authority, and I'd breathe a little easier. No, I didn't deserve that. And I'm done. During this time, small successes started stacking up. I got a contract for a new commercial property project, something bigger than anything I'd handled before. It came with an upfront deposit that felt like a weightlifting achievement, not a handout. I even started hiring a small team, giving me leverage I'd never had before. For the first time, I had the luxury to make decisions without worrying about who would be offended or guilt-tripped into my cooperation. I also began saving systematically, creating a buffer I'd never had before. Each deposit felt like a little reclamation of autonomy. Money had always been a conduit for my family's manipulation, but now it became a tool for me. I no longer worried about emergencies I couldn't control. Instead, I planned for long-term stability. The more I saved, the more independent I felt. The more independent I felt, the calmer I became. There were moments of temptation. I'd catch a message from Melissa, desperate again, or see Mom's frantic texts about unpaid bills. I'd feel the old itch to jump in, to reassure, to rescue. But I resisted. Each time I ignored them, I felt a small, victorious pulse in my chest. They were panicking now, truly panicking, because the roles had reversed. I had finally stepped out of the cycle. Even social interactions improved. Friends noticed I seemed lighter, less burdened, more confident. I stopped apologizing for taking time for myself, for saying no, for refusing to solve other people's crises. I was learning, slowly, that self-preservation wasn't selfish. It was necessary. And yet, the undercurrent of tension remained. I could feel it, even when they weren't reaching out directly. Social media hints, vague posts, and a sudden uptick in mutual friend inquiries all reminded me that they were watching, scheming, desperate for me to slip. The constant awareness added a sharp edge to my calm. I was no longer naive about their entitlement. I was quietly gathering strength. Then, one evening, I received an email that made me sit up straight in bed. It was from a friend of a friend, someone who worked in real estate development. He'd heard about my work and wanted to partner on a project in another city. The project was substantial, potentially doubling my annual revenue within a year. I read it twice before replying. That email wasn't just an opportunity. It was proof that my life was moving forward independently. I didn't need to feed the chaos at home to succeed. In the following weeks, the changes became tangible. I invested in better equipment, hired an assistant, and even started networking with higher-profile clients. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity I hadn't realized I'd lost. And, perhaps most importantly, I started to enjoy it. For years, I'd been a shadow in my own life, defined by the expectations of people who never respected me. Now, I was my own person again, competent, respected, and slowly untouchable. At the same time, I kept an eye on my family. They were unraveling spectacularly. Mom's credit situation deteriorated further. Melissa's car was still repossessed, and she'd taken to public complaints on social media that, in hindsight, looked almost comical. Aunt Kathy had overextended herself financially and had to take a temporary job that humiliated her, all posted indirectly for me to see. They were frantic, yes, but they were also proving something I'd suspected. Without me, they couldn't hold it together. I started to notice a pattern in their behavior that made me both angry and strangely satisfied. The more desperate they became, the more transparent their manipulation. The more they tried to guilt me, the more obvious it was how much they had relied on me as a resource, not a person. I could track their escalation almost like a chart. Initial panic, then passive-aggressive posts, then direct emotional appeals, then public displays of victimhood. And now, they were teetering on the edge of outright humiliation. I didn't respond to any of it. I simply focused on my projects, my savings, my growth. And as my confidence and wealth increased, so did my sense of control. I started to imagine scenarios, not cruelly, but strategically, where I could assert my power without stooping to their level. Not revenge yet, just positioning, just observing, quietly preparing. For the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. They had underestimated me for decades, and now, every misstep, every desperate plea, every manipulative attempt they made only reminded me how far I'd come. They were panicking, I was thriving, and I had patience on my side. The breaking point, their ultimate desperation, was still ahead. But I was ready. For the first time, the fear, guilt, and self-doubt that had defined my interactions with them were gone. I was no longer the person who would drop everything to fix their chaos. I was Charles. I was in control. And in the quiet of my apartment that night, I realized something terrifyingly powerful. I could choose exactly how this ended. After weeks of letting my family flounder while I focused on my own life, I began to notice a pattern that made the idea of revenge feel less like a fantasy and more like inevitability. Their desperation wasn't random. It was organized, predictable, and most importantly, entirely dependent on me. They had always thrived on my generosity, my willingness to cover for their mistakes, and my desire to be needed. Without me, they were helpless. But it wasn't just that. They were sloppy, careless, and vulnerable. I realized I didn't have to confront them directly or escalate further. I just needed to position myself strategically. Work was my first tool. The new real estate project I'd landed in another city had become my focus. The deal was significant, the kind of opportunity that could make or break a company in its infancy. I threw myself into it, learning the ins and outs of commercial real estate investment, understanding contracts, client behavior, and financial leverage in ways I'd never considered before. It was exhilarating. For the first time, my skills were being recognized not just in my small circle of construction projects, but on a scale that demanded respect. I had money, influence, and options, three things my family had never respected or considered before. Meanwhile, I began quietly gathering information about my family's finances, not in a paranoid, obsessive way, but in a calculated, meticulous manner. I noticed the patterns in their spending, the deadlines they were missing, the companies that were starting to harass them for late payments. I even looked at small public records, vehicle registrations, property liens, some of the legal filings Aunt Kathy had tried to hide. They had left a paper trail of chaos, one that could be used strategically. I didn't tell anyone I was paying attention. I just noted things down, filed them away in my mind, and in secure digital records. One evening, I received a call from a friend who worked in finance. He'd heard that I was expanding my business into commercial property and offered some advice that changed my approach entirely. "Charles," he said, "you don't have to just be a contractor. You have knowledge, you have cash flow. You can leverage that into control. You could restructure debt, buy equity stakes, even acquire properties before they're at risk. You're in a position most people would kill for." I realized he was right. I had been quietly building resources while they had been squandering theirs. My family's desperation, the missed payments, the repossessions, the credit issues, wasn't just embarrassing for them. It was leverage. I could watch them spiral, and eventually, I could decide how, when, or even if I wanted to intervene. They had treated me like an expendable resource for decades. Now, I had the power to determine their fates with a few simple decisions. The idea of revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance, about restoring control. I started testing my influence quietly. I called a few business contacts who had relationships with some of the companies my family owed money to. Just inquiries, nothing threatening. I listened, asked questions, and slowly understood the levers I could pull. Banks, lenders, service providers. All of them had limits and procedures that could be navigated to my advantage. I made notes, all the while pretending nothing had changed. My calm, my measured withdrawal, was the perfect cover. I also began to consider timing. Immediate revenge would feel satisfying, yes, but it wouldn't be nearly as effective as a calculated strike. I wanted to see how far their panic would go, how desperate they would become, how much they'd reveal about their entitlement, greed, and reliance on me. I wanted them to feel the full impact of their misjudgment, to see the difference between expectation and reality. Meanwhile, my life outside the chaos flourished. The new project was progressing well. I was networking with clients who respected my judgment and skills, and my savings were growing faster than ever. I could afford luxuries I denied myself for years while funding their crises. A better car, a modest investment property, even a small vacation. Each step was a reminder that I no longer needed them, and that feeling was intoxicating. I also became acutely aware of their weaknesses beyond finances. Melissa's social media dependence made her prideful and impulsive. Mom's obsession with appearances and control left her easily frustrated and predictable. Aunt Kathy's manipulation tactics were transparent once you weren't reacting to them emotionally. All three relied on patterns of behavior that I now understood intimately. Their arrogance, their assumptions about my continued compliance, were vulnerabilities I could exploit when the time came. Then came the final piece of the puzzle, a subtle but critical realization. I could make them dependent on me without them knowing it, but this time on my terms. All I had to do was maintain the illusion that I might step in, that I might care, that I might help, and let them overextend themselves further, reveal more of their entitlement, and dig themselves into deeper holes. The beauty of it was that I could remain patient, quiet, and calm while their desperation escalated. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Not just financially, but emotionally, strategically. I had spent so long reacting to their whims, covering for their mistakes, and trying to earn respect that never came. Now, I was the one setting the pace. I was the one making the moves. And most importantly, I was the one they didn't understand, the one they couldn't predict, the one who had finally stepped out of the trap they had set for me. And as I sat in my apartment that night, reviewing contracts and mental notes, I realized that the path forward was clear. I wasn't going to be a pawn in their games anymore. I wasn't going to react to their chaos. I was going to design it, control it, and when the time was right, turn it all back on them in a way they'd never forget. They say revenge is best served cold. I'd always thought that was dramatic nonsense until the day I realized patience felt colder and far more effective than any quick, messy reaction. I'd been quiet for months, letting them flail while I rebuilt a life that didn't revolve around their needs. What I didn't say was that I wasn't idle. Quiet wasn't just distance, it was a plan. The week before I moved from thinking to doing, I did something small and legal that felt huge. I called a friend in debt purchasing. He was surprised at first when I explained I was interested in a few very small consumer accounts, 2 auto loans, and a handful of utility debts, all tied to my family members. He asked why, and I told him the truth, in as few words as I could. They'd been treating me like a cash machine, and I wanted to see what happens when the roles reversed using the rules of the system they thought they understood. He laughed, half in disbelief and half because he knew me well enough to know I wouldn't take a petty path. He told me how it worked. Debts get bundled, sold for pennies on the dollar to investors, and whoever owns the debt has legal standing to collect, negotiate, or enforce. It was a blunt, neutral tool, and I'd been building leverage for months. If they wanted to treat money like a toy, fine. I'd play by the legal rules and win. So I bought it. Not everything, just enough to matter. Melissa's auto loan, one of Mom's credit accounts that had been going delinquent, and a few small liens against Aunt Kathy's car. I paid cash, quietly, through the channels my finance friend suggested. When the transfers cleared, the accounts flipped on the creditor ledgers. Overnight, I legally had the power they'd always presumed I had by default, to negotiate, to refuse, to repossess according to contract. I could have done it loudly. I could have sent a dozen messages. Pay up or else. That would have been satisfying in the short term, but my goal was more elegant. I wanted them to understand how disposable their favorites, the cars, the credit lines, the facade of security, were without planning or respect. I wanted them to feel the exact kind of helplessness they'd used on me for years. So I moved with the calm I'd cultivated. I made one call to each creditor's servicing department under the proper, official channels and asked for statements and current status. I didn't threaten. I didn't gloat. I simply set schedules, required inspections, missed payment penalties, dates when repossession could be scheduled if no resolution was reached. The system did the dirty work for me. It was never messy because I used contracts, not drama. Creditors are bureaucrats first, cold, exacting, and predictable. They don't care about family narratives. They respond to signatures and timelines. The psychology was the clever part. I emailed them, Mom, Melissa, Aunt Kathy, offering what I called assistance options, typed carefully so it sounded reasonable. A structured repayment plan, temporary deferments if they provided proof of income, or the option to transfer title if they preferred immediate closure. The messages read like a bank's outreach, because legally and functionally, they were. They weren't pleas, they were notices. But each message carried a subtext they couldn't deny. They had to treat me with the same bureaucratic respect they give any other creditor to avoid consequences. Predictably, panic ensued. Melissa Facebook live streamed another sob fest. Mom called and left a voicemail about, "How could you?" Charles, that sounded hollow even to her. Aunt Kathy started begging and offering to sign anything. I didn't answer any of it at first. I wanted them to talk among themselves, to amplify the humiliation. Let them perform their victimhood for the neighborhood. I had the receipts. Besides, the creditors were now doing what I never could without legal standing, setting hard dates. The paperwork, the notices, the scheduled repo windows. Those were the slow knives that cut deeper than any shouting match. But I didn't want ultimate ruin. I wanted accountability and clarity. I drafted one more document, not a filled-out ledger, not a stern warning, but an offer. I'd call it a last chance arrangement. If they signed, I'd provide a manageable repayment schedule and release the immediate threat of repossession. No drama, no shame publicly, and no lecture. Just a contract they could honor or not. The terms were uncomfortably fair. Fewer excuses, stricter timelines, and a clause that required attendance at one meeting with me and a financial counselor of my choosing. The meeting clause was deliberate. I wanted them to sit across from someone neutral and hear the objective, factual account of what their behavior had cost them and what their relationship had cost me. Then I did something I hadn't actually planned on the first day. I thought of revenge. I made their humiliation audiovisual. Not to be cruel, but to make the truth undeniable. I compiled a PDF of the screenshot Melissa had sent me, the group chat messages where they'd mocked me, the timeline of transfers, the notices from creditors with dates and times. I printed it and put it between 2 pages of the last chance document, so when they opened the envelope, it would be unavoidable. It was evidence and an offer, together. On the day the first repossession window opened, I sent the envelopes certified mail. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I simply let the mailman's signature be the start of a chain of events they had orchestrated for years. I felt nothing cinematic, no triumphant high, no rush of cruelty. Just a cool satisfaction that the rules had been applied evenly and that their expectations had been recalibrated through legal paper and predictable processes. Their reactions were immediate and public. Melissa texted me a flurry of caps-locked messages, then deleted them, then posted about me again in a way that read like someone who'd lost control of a script. Mom called my brother, yes, the one who'd previously stayed neutral, and begged him to intervene. Aunt Kathy actually came to my job one afternoon, hands clasped, offering apologies so rehearsed they sounded like lines from the play they'd performed on me for years. In every interaction, they tried to barter sympathy, rewrite their words, or manufacture crisis. None of it changed the fact that legal dates were approaching. Then, 2 days before the scheduled meeting I'd insisted on, Melissa made a mistake. She uploaded a short video to a private story that leaked. A clip of a hushed conversation between her and Aunt Kathy where they laughed about how stupid I'd be to think they'd actually sign anything. It was a slip, the kind of arrogance that comes from assuming someone will always stay the same. I saved the clip. I added it to the folder I was compiling, a cold archive of proof. That night, while they slept, I did something small and merciful. I emailed each of them a scanned copy of the last chance offer with a new deadline. Sign and attend the meeting by 9 a.m. Friday, or the repossessions proceed, and the payment plans go into enforcement mode. I was careful with my wording, clinical, unflappable, and devoid of accusation. I wanted them to see how professional and calm enforcement could be. I wanted them to internalize that kindness was not unlimited. Friday morning came, and I waited for the calls. They came, but not in the way I expected. Melissa's voice was thin, cautious. "Charles, about the meeting, can we talk?" Mom left a voicemail that was closer to pleading than anything else. Aunt Kathy's messages were a string of promises and offers to sign anything I asked. I replied with one text, "Read the packet. There's a meeting time. If you want the repayment plan, be there." No flourish. No apology. Just the terms. I sat at my kitchen table that afternoon, coffee gone cold, watching the clock tick toward the hour I'd arranged to meet them with the counselor. I felt strangely empty and oddly powerful. In the folder beside my laptop were receipts, printed messages, and a timeline that told a simple truth. They had taken me for granted. The system had corrected for it on my behalf. When I opened the door to the little conference room, I saw their faces, anxious, lined, guilty, but still performing. They didn't expect the counselor to be sharp, and they certainly didn't expect me to be calm. The counselor introduced herself, explained the agenda, and then, as we'd agreed in my plan, she looked at them with the detached patience of someone who hears this story often: debts, entitlement, a pattern of reliance on one family member. She asked them direct questions about their budgets, their spending, and their plans. They stumbled. Mom wrung her hands and blamed circumstances. Aunt Kathy deflected. Melissa tried bravado and then wilted when asked for specifics. When the counselor asked if they had anything to say to me, the room went quiet. Each of them offered something different: apologies, excuses, a few half-truths. I listened. I didn't speak until the counselor turned to me and asked what I wanted. I laid out the facts, cold and deliberate. The messages, the legal transfers, the options I'd offered. I told them I'd bought their debt, not to ruin them, but to make one point: that kindness must be met with respect. I told them I would sign off on a manageable plan if they agreed to transparency, budget counseling, and restitution gestures that were meaningful. No more secret loans or flash purchases on credit. They could keep their dignity if they chose to accept responsibility. They nodded, mouths tight. Papers were passed. Pens hovered. Then, as they reached for the pens, a notification broke the silence on my phone. I glanced down. It was a message thread from a number I didn't recognize. The subject line in my inbox read, "Account activity, immediate attention required." I opened it. My heart stuttered only for a second before clarity replaced the slight panic. The message contained something I didn't expect to see in a creditor's note: an automated alert from the repo company confirming that a repossession team had made a pickup the previous evening at a storage yard one of them used. The file number matched a vehicle I owned a decade ago and had lost to a lien I'd never realized was connected to their account. The pickup had been logged under my name by mistake. The repo had taken the wrong car. My stomach dropped. This was the kind of bureaucratic mess that could blow the whole meeting up and their entire attempt at contrition. The counselor looked at me. Mom started to cry again. Melissa whispered, "This is your fault," though I hadn't touched a single thing directly. The room spun with the possibility that everything I'd orchestrated was about to get messy, legally and morally, in ways I hadn't planned for. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the old pattern tug at me, the urge to fix, to step in and smooth the chaos. Then I opened them and smiled, slow and deliberate. I picked up my phone and typed a single line into the group chat that had haunted me for months. "Read the packet. There's more to see." Then I hit send. Their faces shifted through confusion, hope, and something darker. The counselor glanced between us, searching for footing. Outside, a truck idled, the repo company's presence confirmed. In my pocket, the clip Melissa had carelessly uploaded sat waiting. The meeting that was supposed to be about making amends had just become a crossroads where truth, humiliation, and legal reality were about to collide. I folded my hands on the table and waited, letting the small, precise machinery of cause and consequence do its work. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. I had set everything in motion, and now I would watch them decide what shape their future would take. The fallout hit faster than I could have anticipated, though I'd been preparing for months. That morning, after I sent the cryptic "read the packet" message, the tension in the room became unbearable. Mom's hands trembled as she clutched the paperwork. Melissa's cheeks flushed bright red, a mixture of humiliation and anger, and Aunt Kathy's carefully controlled facade was completely shattered. The counselor, calm but perceptive, simply observed, taking notes as I let the situation unfold naturally. First, the creditors began calling. Notifications pinged on Mom's phone, Melissa's email, and Aunt Kathy's texts. Their panic was audible. The voices overlapped in shrill pleas and stammering excuses. The legal reality of the situation hit them instantly. Every repossession notice, every missed payment alert, every small lien I'd quietly purchased now had consequences. They realized that their repeated disregard for responsibility had finally collided with a force they couldn't manipulate. Melissa tried to interject, arguing, pleading for mercy. Charles, you don't understand. I cut her off gently but firmly. I understand perfectly. I've understood for years. What you don't understand is that kindness and trust aren't infinite. Mom's tears flowed freely, a mixture of fear and genuine regret, though heavily laced with performative guilt. We were desperate. We didn't mean for it to go this far. Desperate? I echoed. You were never desperate for your own accountability. You were desperate to control me. That's very different. Aunt Kathy's voice shook as she added, well, we'll fix it. Anything you want, we'll do it. I smiled softly, not cruelly. You've had plenty of opportunities. This isn't about me asking for anything. It's about you facing the results of your choices. You wanted to test limits, to take without consequence. Now you have the full weight of those consequences in front of you. The counselor intervened, asking each of them directly about their financial priorities, spending habits, and willingness to comply with structured repayment plans. The questions were simple, factual, and impossible to evade. One by one, they admitted failures, missed payments, frivolous spending, over-reliance on me. Melissa's bravado crumbled first. She admitted she had no plan, no budget, and no awareness of the actual debts. Mom confessed to hiding bills, ignoring deadlines, and assuming I would always cover them. Aunt Kathy admitted she had manipulated both of them to maintain a facade of control. The air in the room was heavy, a combination of humiliation, fear, and the sobering reality that their actions had created a tangible mess they couldn't charm their way out of. I didn't gloat. I simply let the facts speak for themselves, letting the system I had orchestrated take its course. The repossession trucks were real. The creditors had deadlines. The paperwork was binding. By the end of the day, their personal crises had escalated in ways they couldn't recover from quickly. Cars were reclaimed, accounts frozen, and late fees applied. Public social media posts reflected confusion, as Melissa and Mom tried to explain their failures while maintaining a veneer of dignity. Aunt Kathy had to postpone several social events she had been hosting to attend to the legal and financial realities she'd ignored. Their social reputation, carefully curated for years, suffered alongside their tangible losses. Yet in the midst of their chaos, one thing became clear: I was untouched. I had lost nothing. My career had grown, my savings were intact, and my life was moving forward, untethered by their panic. The irony wasn't lost on me. For decades, they had assumed I was the weak link, the predictable source of support. Now, I had the leverage, the resources, and the calm control. The table had turned entirely. Over the next few weeks, I observed their gradual adjustments. Melissa had to sell a vehicle outright because the repo couldn't be reversed. Mom spent weeks negotiating payment plans on her own, often calling me only to clarify paperwork I had already instructed her to read carefully. Aunt Kathy went to counseling, partially as an effort to salvage relationships, partially because she had no other choice. None of it was easy, none of it was instant, and none of it involved me stepping back into the old role of rescuer. They learned, the hard way, that their entitlement had limits. The most satisfying moment came quietly, late one evening. I was reviewing my own accounts, checking a contract for a new project, when a text from Melissa appeared. Charles, I get it now. I won't ever expect you to bail us out again. We understand. I didn't reply immediately. I stared at it for a long moment, thinking of every slight, every mock, every manipulation I'd endured. Then I typed a single line. Good. That's all I needed you to understand. I put my phone down, leaned back, and finally exhaled. There was no celebration, no spectacle, no shouting from the rooftops. Just quiet, calm satisfaction. The lesson had been delivered, the balance restored, and the power I had reclaimed remained intact. For the first time in decades, I felt entirely free. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their gratitude. I didn't need to fix them. I only needed to live my life, strong, independent, and untouchable. And in that quiet moment, I realized the final truth. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't in the chaos you create, but in the calm certainty that you are the only one who will ever control your own life. I smiled, closed my laptop, and for the first time, truly felt at peace. I'm Harry, 28, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet one in my family. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because saying anything usually led to being laughed at or dismissed. Growing up with a brother like Max made it easy to fade into the background. He was the golden son, loud, confident, charming in a way that made people excuse everything he did. My parents adored him, always bragged about him, always excused his behavior. And me? I was the nice one, which in my family was code for the one who doesn't fight back. Max and I are only 2 years apart, but the difference in how we were treated might as well have been decades. He got into trouble constantly as a teenager, wrecked my dad's car once, dropped out of college twice, and somehow always had an excuse that turned him into the victim. I, on the other hand, got lectured for small things, like missing a family dinner because I had to work late. My parents would shake their heads and say I needed to get my priorities straight. They said that a lot. Get your priorities straight. I think it became their favorite phrase the moment I didn't follow Max's life path, which, ironically, was a mess. I work as a freelance web designer. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. I like it. I like being independent, working at my own pace. But in my family, unless you're wearing a suit and talking about career advancement, your job doesn't count as real. My mom once introduced me to her friend at a barbecue by saying, "This is Harry. He's still figuring things out." I was 26 at the time. My dad laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Max, of course, had just gotten a managerial position at some marketing firm, and suddenly every conversation revolved around him. He talked about networking, personal branding, and leadership, and my parents ate it up like gospel. I tried not to care. I really did. But after years of their little comments, the jokes at my expense, the pitying glances, it started to sink in, like water dripping on stone. A few weeks ago, my mom organized a family dinner to celebrate Max's promotion. Another one. Apparently, he had been promoted again, something about regional oversight, whatever that meant. I wasn't in the mood, but my mom insisted. "Harry, it's important for family to support each other," she said. "Max looks up to you, you know." I almost laughed at that one. Max had never looked up to anyone but himself. Still, I agreed to go. Partly because I didn't want another guilt trip, partly because I thought maybe things would be different this time. Spoiler, they weren't. The dinner was at this upscale restaurant downtown, the kind where the lighting is low and the menu doesn't have prices on it. I arrived a few minutes early, mostly to avoid that awkward moment of walking in late and having everyone look at me. The host led me to the table, a long one, set for 8 people. My parents, Max, his girlfriend Olivia, and a couple of family friends were already there. The moment I sat down, Max smirked and said, "Wow, Harry actually showed up on time. Mark the calendar." Everyone laughed, except me. I forced a smile and sat down, pretending not to notice the way my mom looked relieved that I didn't snap back. That's the thing. In our family, it wasn't Max's job to stop being disrespectful. It was mine to not overreact. Dinner started off fine enough, at least by our standards. The waiter came around, took our drink orders, and Max immediately ordered a bottle of champagne. "It's a special occasion," he announced, "and I'm paying." My mom beamed at him like he'd just offered to donate a kidney. Conversation flowed easily for them. I mostly listened while they talked about Max's vision for leadership, his strategic mindset, and other words that sounded like they came from a self-help seminar. Every now and then someone would remember I was there and toss me a question. "Still doing that computer stuff, Harry?" my dad asked, swirling his wine. "Web design," I corrected quietly. Yeah. You must like working from home, huh?" he said. "No boss breathing down your neck. No deadlines, no pressure." Max chuckled. "Sounds like the dream for someone who hates responsibility." That one stung a little. Olivia giggled behind her glass, and I could feel my face heating up. I tried to ignore it, taking a sip of water and looking at the menu. I'd been in that position so many times, sitting there, enduring their jabs, wishing I could just leave without being called sensitive. But then Max leaned back, grinning, and said the line that lit the fuse. "Let's drink to the one who still hasn't figured life out," he said loudly. raising his glass toward me. To Harry, the family's late bloomer. Everyone laughed. Even my mom. Even my dad. The laughter rolled around the table like it was some harmless joke, but it felt like a slap. I smiled, a tight, practiced one. The kind I'd used for years to hide the sting. Sure, I said quietly, clinking my glass against Max's. He smirked like he'd won something. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt tired. Tired of always being their punchline. Tired of letting them make me feel small. I didn't say anything right then, but I knew I wasn't going to just sit there and take it anymore. The waiter came by to take our orders, and that's when everything started to change, slowly, quietly, like the first crack in glass before it shatters. The waiter smiled politely and said, "You're the one who made the reservation, right?" I nodded. "Perfect," he said cheerfully. "They're paying separately." The entire table went silent. You could feel the shift in the air, sharp, sudden. Max's smile faltered. My mom blinked in confusion. My dad set down his glass. I didn't say a word, just looked down at the menu as if nothing unusual had happened. That was the first time I saw Max's confidence flicker. Just a flicker, but enough to notice. Enough to know that maybe, just maybe, the years of being their quiet target were coming to an end. The silence after the waiter's comment didn't last long. It never did with my family. My mom was the first to recover, laughing a little too loudly and waving her hand in the air like she was trying to erase the awkwardness. "Oh no, no, it's all together," she said quickly, glancing at me with that tight smile she used whenever she wanted me to play along. "Harry's just teasing." I didn't look up from the menu. "No," I said calmly, "he's right. I made the reservation, but everyone's paying separately. That's what I told them when I called." Max snorted, half amused, half irritated. "You're kidding, right?" I finally met his eyes. Why would I be kidding? For a moment, the table froze again. Olivia glanced between us like she was watching a bomb about to go off. My dad chuckled under his breath, trying to defuse the tension. "Come on, Harry, don't be dramatic. It's a celebration. You know your brother's doing well. He offered to pay for everyone." "Actually," I said, keeping my tone light, "he offered to pay for the champagne. Not the whole meal." Max's grin faltered. "Seriously? Seriously?" The waiter looked from me to Max, clearly unsure who to listen to. My mom let out a long, exaggerated sigh. "Harry," she said in that familiar scolding tone, "it's not about the money. Don't make things awkward." I could feel that old urge creeping in, the one that told me to just give in, laugh it off, keep the peace. That's what I'd always done before. But this time, I didn't cave. I just shrugged and said, "I'm not making it awkward. I'm just clarifying." The waiter nodded politely, jotted something down, and walked away. As soon as he was gone, the conversation shifted back to Max's accomplishments, like nothing had happened. But I could tell it had thrown him off. His voice was tighter now, his jokes a little sharper. Every now and then, I caught him giving me a look, the kind that said, "What are you up to?" Dinner went on, the same way it always did. My parents gushed about Max's new position, how proud they were, how he'd always been a go-getter. Olivia chimed in with how hard he worked, how people naturally looked up to him. I wanted to laugh at that part. Max had a talent for taking credit for other people's work. I knew that because I'd helped him before. Quietly designed his business presentation deck last year when he claimed he didn't have time. He'd won an internal award for it, never mentioning my name once. At some point, my mom turned the conversation toward me, as if remembering I existed. "Harry, what about you? Any new projects?" I hesitated. "A few, yeah. I've been working with a local nonprofit, redesigning their website." "That's nice," she said, in the same tone you'd use when talking about a hobby. "It must be good experience." "It's paid work," I corrected. "Oh," she said, surprised. "Well, that's wonderful." Then she turned right back to Max, asking about his new company car. I felt invisible again, like I always did. Sitting there, half listening while they talked about him as if he were the only person who mattered. Every now and then, Max would glance at me and smirk, tossing out some sarcastic comment to keep the room laughing. "Maybe one day you'll design my company's website," he joked. "Assuming you're still freelancing by then." I just smiled faintly. "You couldn't afford me," I said. For the first time that night, a few people at the table laughed with me instead of at me. But Max didn't. His expression tightened, and I could see the flicker of irritation in his eyes. He didn't like being on the receiving end of a joke, especially not from me. After that, things got tense in subtle ways. My mom started fussing about how I wasn't eating enough. My dad asked if I'd ever thought about getting a real job. Olivia asked how I handled not having coworkers, as if being self-employed was the same as being unemployed. Every comment was wrapped in that polite tone people use when they want to insult you without sounding mean. When the food came, I barely tasted it. I was too focused on the conversation unraveling around me. The way Max dominated it, the way my parents encouraged it, the way they all made me feel like a guest at my own family's table. Then, halfway through the meal, Max leaned back and said, "You know what? Let's do something fun. Everyone go around and share what they're proudest of this year. I'll start." He grinned, obviously waiting for someone to say how great he was, which they did. My mom immediately praised his promotion again. My dad added something about his leadership skills. Then it was my turn. "Harry," Max said, raising an eyebrow. "What about you? What's your big accomplishment this year?" I thought for a moment. "I moved into my own place," I said. My mom smiled weakly. "Oh, right. That little apartment." "It's not that little," I said, more defensively than I intended. "It's mine." Max chuckled. "Well, hey, everyone's got to start somewhere. I remember my first place. Couldn't wait to get out of there." My dad laughed. "Yeah, and look where you are now." It was like they didn't even hear me. I felt my chest tighten, the way it always did in these moments. That mix of humiliation and anger that sits just under your ribs. But instead of reacting, I just smiled and said, "You're right. Everyone starts somewhere." Olivia leaned toward Max, whispering something that made him laugh again. I caught a word or two: slow starter, late bloomer. My mom didn't notice, or pretended not to. My dad poured more wine. The waiter came by again, and this time I noticed how Max's demeanor changed. He suddenly acted overly generous, loud, almost performative, complimenting the waiter, making jokes, talking about how he loved treating family right. I realized what he was doing. He wanted to reassert control. That's what Max always did when things slipped even slightly out of his grasp. He raised his glass again. "All right," he said, grinning, "to family. Especially my little brother here, who reminds us that it's never too late to figure things out." Everyone laughed again. My mom even clinked her glass against his. I stared at the bubbles in my water, jaw tight. "You good, Harry?" Max asked, his tone mockingly sweet. "I'm great," I said. "Really great." He leaned closer. "You sure? You look tense. You should relax. Not everyone can be successful right away." It wasn't the words, exactly, that did it. It was the tone. That smug, condescending tone that said he thought he was better than me, that he enjoyed being better than me. I smiled, but this time it wasn't forced. It was calm, cold, the kind of smile that said you have no idea what's coming. "Don't worry," I said softly. "I'm figuring things out just fine." He laughed, thinking it was another harmless comeback. But I wasn't joking, because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd already been planning something long before this dinner. Something small at first, just a quiet way to make a point. But the more they talked, the more I realized I didn't want to make a point. I wanted to make a statement. When the desserts came, my mom asked Max about his new condo. "It's beautiful," Olivia gushed. "Open concept, smart lighting, all top-tier appliances. He worked hard for it." "I bet he did," I said. Max smirked. "It's nice, yeah? You should come by sometime. Maybe get some inspiration for your place. Though it might make you feel cramped." That got another round of laughter. I laughed too this time, just to keep the mood light. But inside, something had fully settled. A calm, clear kind of anger, the kind that doesn't explode, it simmers. As the check time approached, my dad looked at Max. "You sure you've got it, son?" Max nodded confidently. "Of course. I invited everyone, my treat." But then the waiter returned, holding a small folder and addressing me politely. "Just confirming, sir, everyone's paying separately, correct?" I didn't even have to answer. The way Max's smile fell said enough. The look on my mom's face, a mix of confusion and disbelief. told me she hadn't considered the possibility that her perfect son might actually have to pay his own way. Wait, my dad said slowly, turning to me. You're serious about that? I nodded. Completely. The air around the table grew heavy again. Max let out a sharp laugh, clearly annoyed now. Wow, Harry. Real classy move. I shrugged. You said you were treating us, not me. Olivia frowned. This is ridiculous. Who even does that? I guess I do, I said simply. It was quiet after that. Uncomfortably so. The kind of silence where everyone's pretending to look at their plates, but secretly watching for someone to break first. That's when I saw it. The flicker of uncertainty in Max's expression, the realization that maybe he wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner was just the start. The moment that years of built-up resentment began to turn into something else entirely. The tension at the table didn't disappear after the check fiasco. In fact, it thickened, like smoke in a room no one wanted to leave. Max's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a tight jaw and eyes that flicked to mine every few seconds. He tried to keep the conversation going, but it was strained, forced. He told a story about an office prank he'd pulled that totally went viral in his company, but no one laughed like they normally did. Even my mom's attempts to interject praise for him were halting, uneasy. I kept my own responses neutral, letting the silence hang heavy when the jokes fell flat. After the waiter left with everyone's individual payments, Max leaned toward me with that familiar edge in his voice, the one that always meant trouble was coming. You think you're clever, huh? He said quietly, though the words were loud enough for me to hear clearly. I didn't respond. I just sipped my water, watching him. You're really going to make a thing out of this? He asked, narrowing his eyes. I'm not making anything out of anything, I said evenly. You're the one acting like a child. He laughed, but it was hollow. Child? Me? Everyone's laughing at you. You really think you're the one in control here? That was the first real spark of something bigger. Something inside me shifted. The part that had spent years being the background character in my own life. The one that always smiled and nodded and accepted the dismissive comments and the pitying glances. That part had been replaced with something quiet, patient, and steady. Something that had learned to wait for the right moment. I didn't say a word, just watched him. And then he did it. The thing that broke whatever fragile sense of fairness I had left. It started with a text. I'd been expecting it, though I tried not to. I stepped outside to check my phone under the pretense of taking a quick breath. There it was, a message from Max. But it wasn't just any message, it was an image. My heart sank before I even opened it. It was a screenshot from the booking app I'd used to make the dinner reservation. My personal credit card information, front and back, exposed in plain detail. Max had taken a screenshot of my payment info while I was distracted at the table and sent it to himself. And he didn't stop there. The message had a short caption, "Let's see how your little freelance gig handles this." I felt my stomach drop. My personal finances were private. That was a line no one in our family had ever crossed, and yet Max had. Without hesitation, without a second thought, I realized then that this wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was a deliberate, calculated move to intimidate me, to make me feel small, powerless, exposed. I walked back inside, trying to keep my composure. I kept my face calm, neutral, like I always did when they tried to provoke me. But inside, anger surged, hot and quiet, like molten metal ready to pour. Max noticed me coming back and gave me a sly grin. "Everything okay?" he asked innocently, though I could see the smugness in his eyes. "Fine," I said, my voice low. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. He'd violated a trust one didn't know I'd had left, that my own brother wouldn't deliberately use my private information to embarrass me or sabotage me. And the worst part? My parents, who usually swooped in to lecture me for any perceived slight, didn't even notice. They were too busy complimenting Max, asking about his condo again, praising him for being so responsible with money. It made my blood boil. How could they see his behavior as normal and still pat him on the back? How had they not noticed the betrayal? I kept my cool, letting the conversation drift toward desserts and trivial small talk. But every smile I forced, every laugh I managed, felt like it was sewn on my face. Inside, I was planning. I was calculating. Every injustice, every laugh at my expense, every time Max had undermined me over the years, I was filing it away, turning it over, considering my moves. Halfway through dessert, Max got up to take a call. Olivia whispered something to him, and he left the dining room for a few minutes. I glanced at my mom, who was arranging her napkin and pretending to inspect the table. "You okay, Harry?" she asked. I could hear concern, but it wasn't real concern. It was the kind that's almost an obligation. Like she had to say it. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "You don't seem fine," she said, tilting her head. "I'm fine," I repeated, firmer this time. The tension in her voice was thin, just a faint layer over her usual blind favoritism. I realized something important in that moment. No one was going to protect me. Not my parents. Not anyone. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to prove I wasn't just their late bloomer, it was on me. Max returned, unaware of the storm brewing behind my calm expression. He resumed his bragging about work achievements, the condo, the promotion, everything he thought defined him as the successful one. But for the first time, I was listening differently. I wasn't absorbing the insult, the arrogance, the patronizing jokes. I was cataloging them. Every word, every smirk, every condescending laugh. By the time the meal ended, I was more than aware of how far this had escalated. Max had crossed a line. He had violated a basic trust, exposed me to potential financial risk, and yet walked away laughing. That's when I realized the war was no longer metaphorical. It was real, and I had to respond, not in a rash, emotional way like he would expect, but deliberately, strategically. The ride home was quiet. Max drove, Olivia in the passenger seat, and my parents filled the back. I didn't speak, not because I didn't want to, but because speaking now would have been predictable. They had no idea how much I'd realized tonight, no idea how much I had planned to turn the tables. When we got home, Max went straight to his room. I passed him in the hallway and caught his eye. He gave me a small smirk, the one he used when he thought he'd won, when he believed I was still beneath him. I didn't respond, just kept walking. Later, when everyone else was asleep, I sat at my desk and logged into my accounts to double-check that no real damage had been done. Thankfully, nothing had been stolen, nothing hacked. But the violation itself was enough. The audacity, the thoughtlessness, the casual cruelty. It was a line crossed. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I couldn't let Max continue to think he could manipulate, belittle, and betray me without consequence. The dinner had been more than just another humiliation. It had been the catalyst, the trigger, the moment I realized that playing nice for years had gotten me nothing but laughter and dismissive comments. I started thinking about all the ways I could turn this around, ways to make him feel the tension, the uncertainty, the discomfort he had so casually inflicted on me. I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted precision. I wanted control. I wanted him to understand that his actions, his smugness, and his betrayal would have consequences, and they would be consequences that he couldn't laugh off. I stayed up all night planning, making notes, sketching out scenarios, thinking through every conversation, every interaction. I considered timing, optics, the reactions of my parents and Olivia. This wasn't about hurting him physically or publicly humiliating him in a petty way. It was about reclaiming the power he had stolen from me for years. By dawn, I had a plan forming in my mind, quiet and methodical. A plan that would force him to face the same kind of unease, uncertainty, and exposure he had so casually subjected me to. And I knew it would work. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was anticipating. I wasn't the background character anymore. I was the one setting the stage. After that night, the days that followed were a haze of frustration, humiliation, and simmering anger. I couldn't stop thinking about Max's betrayal. Every time I saw him at family events, or even in my dreams, I remembered the smug smirk he'd worn when he thought he had control over me. It wasn't just the dinner, though that was bad enough. It was the pattern, the years of subtle digs, the constant undermining, and the way my family had always cheered him on. At first, I didn't know what to do. My initial instinct was to lash out, to confront him immediately, to show him that I wasn't a joke. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that reacting in anger would only play into his hands. Max thrived on theatrics and drama, and if I gave him what he wanted, I would be back in the same position I'd been in for most of my life. Dismissed, laughed at, and made to feel small. So instead, I did what I'd done for years, but with a new mindset. I focused on myself. I threw myself into work more intensely than ever before. My freelance projects had always been steady, but now I pushed myself to take on more challenging assignments, to seek out clients who paid well and respected my skills. I refined my portfolio, redesigned my website, and started networking quietly online. For the first time, I didn't worry about impressing anyone outside my own standards. This was for me. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to break down, when the weight of years of belittlement and betrayal pressed on me like a physical force. I remember one night, after a particularly grueling project that seemed endless, I sat in my apartment staring at the glow of my computer screen, exhausted, frustrated, and questioning if any of this would ever matter. But then I remembered Max, laughing with my parents while holding my personal information like a trophy. And I remembered how powerless I had felt at that dinner. That memory ignited something in me, a quiet determination that was different from the reactive anger I'd felt before. I began tracking my finances meticulously, ensuring I had everything in order. I set up multiple accounts, invested wisely, and learned about tax strategies that would allow me to maximize my freelance income. I started small, but each decision felt like reclaiming a piece of control I'd never been allowed to have before. The sense of independence was intoxicating. I felt, for the first time, that I was building a life that wasn't contingent on anyone else's approval. Meanwhile, my family continued their pattern of ignoring my existence in favor of Max's accomplishments. Invitations to family gatherings came with subtle digs and expectations that I would stay in my place. I showed up when necessary, but I started attending on my own terms, limiting contact, and refusing to play the role they expected me to. Each interaction became a study in patience and observation. I listened more than I spoke, noting their weaknesses, habits, and predictable reactions. It was quiet work, but in that quiet, I gained clarity. One evening, my parents invited me to what they called a casual family dinner, their code for Max to show off another promotion or purchase, and for me to sit quietly and smile. I almost declined, but I decided to go, seeing it as an opportunity to assess the battlefield. True to form, Max arrived first, regaling my parents with his latest work achievement. The condo, the promotion, the awards, all of it. I listened, nodded, and smiled at the right moments, but inside I was detached. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't hurt. I was observing. That night, something clicked. Max made a comment about one of my recent projects, a small nonprofit website redesign, dismissing it as cute, implying it was insignificant compared to his corporate triumphs. My parents chuckled. Olivia smiled at him. The usual. But instead of feeling diminished, I felt a surge of calm. I knew something they didn't. The value of the work I was doing. The clients I was building relationships with. The money I was saving and investing. The independence I had carved out. I started reaching out to more clients, some local businesses, some small startups, and others across the country. Each project I completed increased my confidence. Each successful negotiation reminded me that I was capable, that I didn't need their validation to define my worth. Slowly, my bank account reflected the work I had put in, not exorbitantly, but steadily, in a way that gave me options I hadn't had before. And then came the first real sign of leverage. One of my clients, a tech startup, loved my work so much they offered me a retainer contract for multiple projects, paying significantly more than any single freelance job I had ever taken. This was the turning point, a moment where I realized I could thrive on my own terms. I didn't need to compete with Max's corporate world. I was building a different kind of empire, quietly, methodically, without anyone noticing. During this time, I also began improving other areas of my life. I moved into a slightly larger apartment, something I could genuinely call mine, with space to work comfortably and think without interruption. I joined a local gym and committed to a routine, not for anyone else, but because I felt stronger and more capable with each passing week. My social circle expanded. Friends I trusted, colleagues who respected my skills, people who weren't constantly comparing me to someone else. For the first time, my life wasn't just a reaction to Max and my parents' favoritism. It was my own. Despite all of this growth, I never lost sight of the betrayal. Max had overstepped in a way that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just about pride or ego. He had violated a basic trust, one I hadn't realized until it was gone. But now, instead of being a victim of it, I could use it as a foundation for my strategy. I started quietly gathering information, details about his work, public statements, social media posts, even small business ventures he was involved with. The kind of information that could, if used carefully, give me leverage. I also started documenting every interaction with him, the jokes, the dismissals, the condescending remarks, in a private journal. Not to obsess, not to stew, but to create a timeline, a record, a foundation. Because if I was going to respond, I wanted to do it in a way that was precise, undeniable, and effective. No emotion-driven explosions. Just clean, deliberate, undeniable results. Months passed. Slowly, quietly, my life improved. My projects grew more lucrative, my independence more tangible, and my confidence solidified. I no longer flinched at Max's presence, no longer sought approval from my parents, and no longer doubted my own abilities. Each small victory, a successful client project, a new investment milestone, a compliment from a colleague, was a brick in the wall I was building between me and the old powerless version of myself. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, I was different. Not dramatically, not in a way that was obvious to everyone else, but different. I carried myself with a quiet confidence that was rooted in actual accomplishment, not the hollow praise that Max received from my family. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And that quiet power, the kind that grows from independence, competence, and foresight, was more satisfying than any recognition from my family could ever be. Max noticed it first. He tried to bait me during the gathering, throwing subtle insults about my work, about my apartment, about my income. And for the first time, I didn't react the way he expected. I smiled politely, nodded, and then moved on, letting the comments fade into irrelevance. The more he tried, the more frustrated he became. And the more frustrated he became, the more obvious it was to anyone watching that his control was slipping. It was during one of these dinners that I realized something important. My rise didn't have to be flashy. It didn't have to be dramatic, and it certainly didn't have to be at his expense, at least, not yet. The key was patience, quiet accumulation of power, and precise observation. Every slight, every joke, every underhanded move Max made was cataloged, noted, and remembered. And every small success I achieved independently, outside the shadow of his influence, became another tool in the arsenal I was quietly assembling. By this point, I had reached a level of calm clarity I had never known before. The anger from that first betrayal had been refined into strategy, the humiliation of years into perspective. I wasn't just preparing for revenge. I was preparing for a position where I didn't need to rely on anyone's approval or validation. A place where I had power, influence, and confidence rooted in reality. And the best part? Max still didn't see it coming. He still assumed I was the same quiet, malleable, late bloomer he had always known. He still thought he was in control, still believed he had the upper hand. Little did he know that every small victory I quietly achieved, every subtle action I had taken to protect myself and grow stronger, was building toward a moment he would never forget. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and finally, my place at the table, not as the background character, not as the punchline, but as someone who could dictate the terms. And the more I reflected on the years of mistreatment, the more precise my plan became. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, patient, strategic, and ready. By the time the next big family event came around, I was ready to step into a new phase of my life, one where I wouldn't just be acknowledged, I would be respected. And that respect wouldn't be given freely, not after all these years. It would be earned, enforced, and undeniable. I had reached rock bottom emotionally, financially, and socially within my family's eyes. But in that rock bottom, I had found a foundation, one built on skill, independence, and quiet power. And from that foundation, my rise had begun. Over the next several months, my quiet rise continued, and with it, a growing sense that the next phase had to be more deliberate. I was no longer just surviving, no longer just building a life that Max couldn't touch. I needed leverage. I needed something concrete, something that could shift the balance of power in a single move. It started with work. One of my biggest clients, the tech startup I'd been working with for months, invited me to a networking event for local entrepreneurs. I almost declined. Networking events had always felt uncomfortable, awkward spaces where I was reminded that I was small potatoes compared to others who flaunted corporate titles and investment portfolios. But this time, I went, determined to observe and listen rather than compete. That night, something clicked. I met people who valued skill over pedigree, results over charisma, substance over surface-level charm. I met investors, consultants, and successful freelancers who actually cared about work ethic and talent. And in the course of a casual conversation with one of them, I discovered something huge: a growing opportunity in the local market for freelance web designers with technical expertise in automation and client workflow systems. Exactly the kind of service I excelled at. The kicker? Most of the other big players in the field were overbooked, disorganized, or charging absurdly high rates. It was a perfect storm, a niche that matched my skills, demand that I could meet, and a competitive advantage I had been cultivating quietly for months. I left that event with a notebook full of contacts, ideas, and strategies. I realized that if I approached this carefully, I could secure long-term clients who would rely on me exclusively, and at rates that could quickly dwarf any of Max's small triumphs. Over the next few weeks, I implemented a plan. I restructured my portfolio to highlight high-value skills, polished my website to showcase automation and efficiency tools, and began cold emailing prospects with precise, tailored proposals. Each message was designed to demonstrate competence without arrogance, subtly conveying that I was reliable, capable, and decisive. Slowly, I began to see results. One small business asked me to redesign their entire workflow. Another client offered a retainer contract for monthly projects. Each deal built my credibility, my reputation, and most importantly, my independence. Meanwhile, I kept a close eye on Max's social media activity. Nothing overt, just the casual scrolling that allowed me to track his business dealings, his bragging posts, and his network of colleagues who assumed he was untouchable. I noticed patterns. He relied heavily on appearances, flashy promotions, and superficial praise from his bosses. He hadn't cultivated real influence or tangible assets. Everything he had, his power, was performative. That realization was key. I understood that if I could position myself as someone with real, demonstrable influence, I could dismantle his facade without ever appearing aggressive. At home, I kept interactions minimal, measured. Max tried to bait me during family dinners, but I ignored the jabs, observed the reactions, and documented everything. I knew that the more he underestimated me, the stronger my eventual position would be. My parents continued to fawn over him, completely blind to the shift happening quietly under their noses. And Olivia? Well, she was still loyal to Max, still the cheerleader for his ego, but even she began to notice small changes. The calm confidence I now carried was impossible to ignore entirely. Then came the breakthrough. One of my contacts from the networking event connected me to a small, but rapidly growing software company that needed someone to revamp their client-facing platforms. The project was high stakes, high visibility, and well-funded, and they specifically requested someone who could manage it independently. I accepted immediately. The work was intense, but it allowed me to build a portfolio of undeniable success, create real leverage, and connect with industry leaders who respected results over charm. By the end of the project, I had not only delivered a superior product, but also secured a long-term retainer that guaranteed me a significant income stream. I realized I was now in a position that Max could never compete with, at least not without showing his reliance on external validation. While he continued to chase promotions and corporate recognition, I was building a network of influence, credibility, and financial independence, quietly, efficiently, and, most importantly, untouchable. It wasn't just professional growth, either. I also invested time into myself personally. I enrolled in a few short courses on business strategy and personal finance. I started learning negotiation tactics and the subtle art of influence. Each skill felt like another brick in the foundation of what would eventually be my power play. By the time I was done, I wasn't just stronger financially. I was strategically prepared, confident in my abilities, and ready to leverage every opportunity to assert control over a situation where I had historically been powerless. Every interaction with Max now became a calculated exercise. I didn't confront him directly, not yet. Instead, I positioned myself quietly, building reputation, influence, and resources that would one day render his arrogance irrelevant. He still laughed at me during family dinners, still made those subtle digs, still flaunted his performative achievements. But with every comment, every smirk, every attempt to belittle me, he unknowingly fed the foundation of my plan. I had learned a vital lesson. Power wasn't about loud victories or immediate satisfaction. It was about patience, positioning, and preparation. The betrayal had been the catalyst, but this slow accumulation of skill, credibility, and influence was what would allow me to execute the kind of payoff that Max would never see coming. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted certainty. I wanted something clean, precise, and impossible for them to spin into another joke. So I planned like I always do now, quietly, with other people's expertise and systems doing the heavy lifting while I stayed calm in the background. A few weeks before the night I picked, I sent a careful, unemotional email to a handful of people who mattered. Max's direct boss at the firm, a senior account director who'd worked on the regional campaign, and one of the company's external auditors, all addresses I'd pulled from public filings and LinkedIn. Attached were files, original source files, timestamps, and notes that showed the deck Max had presented at his big client when meeting last quarter had been adapted almost verbatim from a project I'd done for a nonprofit 2 years earlier. Not just similar design choices, but text chunks, image cropping, and a unique interaction idea that I'd prototyped and documented in the project repo. I kept those files because I work like an archivist. I saved the versions that show how things evolved. That night, those files were my evidence. I didn't send the email in anger. I wrote it like a professional. Subject line, concise summary, attachments, a note that the provenance of the materials could be validated via server logs, and file metadata. I BCC'd a trusted contact at the startup that had given me my big break, someone who owed me a favor and who knew how influential a quietly presented set of facts could be in the right inbox. Then I set the delivery for that evening, 20 minutes after our reservation time. I scheduled read receipts. I checked the timestamps twice. I slept poorly, not out of fear, but because the plan felt impossibly neat. The night itself was predictably staged. Max arrived with a grin and a little too bright suit, Mom trailing like a proud moth. He spoke loudly, kissed cheeks, shook hands, and immediately hacked the room's rhythm with his voice. He made small concessions to charm and then returned to preening. For the first hour, I kept my calm face on. The same face that had seen me through years of underplaying. The same face that could be unreadable when it mattered most. When the waiter returned to clear our plates, my phone buzzed. I felt it buzz against my thigh before I checked it, because I'd rehearsed that feeling. The delivery notification hit. Message delivered. A breath. 2 more vibrations. Read. My heart kicked, not from panic, but from the specific, cold electric satisfaction of a trigger pulled and the machine doing its work. Max was mid-sentence, describing the latest client victory with that comfortable arrogance of his. He didn't notice me check my phone. Mom nodded like a bobblehead. Olivia laughed at a joke that wasn't actually that funny. I let the table churn with the usual noise. The best part of any clean plan is watching it land while you act like it isn't happening. The third buzz was different. It was a phone call. Not mine. I watched Max's hand go for his pocket. He glanced at me when his phone lit up, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face that I had rarely seen. Whoever was calling had clipped his armor. He took the call, put it on speaker, and then I heard the voice. Clipped, professional, not a hint of theatrics. "Max, we need to talk about the regional deck you presented. Have you got a minute?" It was his boss. The table went quiet in that way restaurants do when private drama leaks into public space. Max's voice, usually so smooth, sounded off balance. Yeah, now's fine. Everything okay?" A pause. "What do you mean? I led that presentation." He was cut off, and my lips twitched into a smile I kept from widening. That pause was the fulcrum of years of mockery. The boss's voice returned, professional but with an edge that made the hairs on my arms prickle. "We've received some documents from an independent source showing overlap between your presentation and an external project. We need to reconcile the sources. Legal and compliance are going to review it first thing tomorrow." The table was suddenly very small. My mom made a little choking noise, something between a laugh and a gasp. My dad's face shifted, the easy bonhomie drained. Olivia's hand landed on Max's sleeve like she was trying to tether him. Max's eyes darted from his boss's voice, to me, to the rest of the table. For the first time all night his smile didn't recover. He tried to keep it light. "This is ridiculous. It's just," but he didn't finish. His mouth tightened as he listened to the boss continue in that flat, awful way that meant decisions were already underway. "We'll need copies of your sources, Max. Please hand them over by tomorrow noon. If you can't, HR will have to escalate, and we'll have to inform the client." Another pause. "Yes, we'll have someone from legal reach out." Max's jaw worked. He muttered something about it being a misunderstanding, about creative overlap being common. He snapped the phone closed and set it on the table like a grenade. The laughter that had surrounded him an hour ago recoiled. The room smelled faintly of lemon and the kind of dread that comes from realizing a comfortable narrative is cracking. No one met my eyes at first. That little silence, the one where a mountain of assumptions begins to slide, felt enormous. I could see Max counting his options like dice, trying to find a number that would land him back in control. He looked at me like a man trying to locate the trick that had undone him, scanning for the magician. "Who did this?" he asked, voice oddly small. "Who sent them?" He kept saying it, as if reciting the words might conjure a different answer. I set my fork down slowly, each motion deliberate. The part of me that had rehearsed the email, the metadata checks, and the read receipts enjoyed the small theatricality of the moment. I let the silence last a few seconds longer than felt polite. Then I answered, without gloating, without victory in my tone, the exact opposite of what he'd expect from someone out for theatrics. "I sent them," I said. The words landed differently than he must have imagined. He blinked, and for a few seconds his lips formed around an incredulous "you?" Like it would be a joke if the name were wrong. Mom inhaled sharply, the bobblehead effect swallowed by a real intake of breath. Olivia's hand left his sleeve as if suddenly she remembered she had other things to do. Max's eyes hardened. "Why would you do that?" he demanded. "Because you've been taking things from me for years," I said, and I kept my voice steady. "You took credit for work and you took my privacy. You made it normal for my parents to laugh at me. I sent the materials to people who can verify them. They'll be the ones who decide what happens." I didn't say revenge. I didn't need to. I said facts, the language that cannot be easily spun into a joke. He looked like a man who'd been slapped by silence. The room leaned toward him, curious in that human way when someone's carefully curated life begins to splinter. Max swallowed. "You can't just," he started, and then the phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then at the rest of us. This time the call was different. It was a text preview lighting up his screen. "Legal has acknowledged receipt. We'll schedule a meeting." Max's color drained. He set the phone down, hands trembling the tiniest bit. For someone who'd always controlled rooms with a grin, the tremor was a grotesque new accessory. "You didn't have to do this in front of everyone," Mom whispered, a reproach wrapped in mortification. My dad looked like someone who'd been woken in the wrong century. Olivia opened her mouth and closed it without a sound. I wanted to tell them more, to outline everything, to name every little theft of credit, every joke. Every time they'd applauded and left me to be the punchline. Instead, I did something more disarming. I told a quiet truth. I wasn't trying to humiliate him, I said. I was trying to make sure the people who gave him credit had the full picture. If he's confident in his work, he'll prove it. If not, that's on him. I folded my napkin and placed it neatly beside my plate, the most mundane thing in a room that had suddenly gone taut. Max laughed then, not a confident laugh, but an incredulous, thin thing. "You're serious," he said. "I'm serious," I replied. And as the restaurant hummed around our little island of stillness, the waiter returned with the check, and somewhere in the world an email thread I'd started buried itself into corporate systems I'd never belonged to. Max's voice had the brittle edge of someone rediscovering consequences. My parents' faces were mirrors of confusion and worry. Olivia's eyes darted, searching for any salvage line. I hadn't wanted public spectacle. I wanted something that would make him, face reality. The plan had worked. Calm, precise, and surgical. But as my phone chimed again, a new message preview that read, "We're opening an inquiry." I felt that familiar, thrilling hush of the moment before something irreversible. Max looked at me like a man who was just calculating how to keep breathing in water. He hadn't expected consequences that weren't performative. He hadn't expected consequences that came with documentation and witnesses and legal pathways. "Why now?" he asked, not in anger this time, but with a raw, stunned edge. I thought of every dinner where I'd sat small, every laugh I'd swallowed, the screenshot he'd thought was a trophy. "Because I'm done waiting," I said. "And because some truths are best shown with receipts." He opened his mouth again, possibly to shout, to deny, to bargain. The restaurant's hum swelled into a small wave around us. I could see the moment stretching, the part where people decide whether the story ends in a messy public fall or a quieter, corporate sorting out. I watched his face, waiting for the next move, thinking of all the slow months of work and the careful network I'd leaned on to make that single email land where it needed to. I felt the surge of tired satisfaction you get when a plan unfolds exactly as engineered. The phone on the table buzzed once more. Max picked it up, thumbed a response, then set it down with a sound that was more final than I expected. He looked at the group, then back at me, and for the first time in years his usual smirk was gone. "Are you happy?" he asked, quietly, almost pleading. I had a dozen answers, triumphant and petty, logical and cruel. Instead, I surprised myself with the only one that felt true. "I'm relieved," I said. He stared at me a long time. Then the waiter approached with a polite cough. And that's when everything in the room shifted, not because anyone shouted or cried, but because the world had quietly rearranged itself around a new fact. There would be an inquiry. There would be questions. There would be witnesses. There would be consequences that couldn't be laughed away with a toast. Max's lips moved. He began to say something, an attempt, maybe, to reclaim his story. But before his words could land, the restaurant's host walked over to a nearby table and leaned in to speak softly to a man in a sharp suit. The man glanced our way, a flash of recognition crossing his face. He pulled the host aside and whispered something that made the host's eyebrows rise. Max's head snapped toward them. He followed the exchange with the attention of someone who suddenly realized a new, public audience might be interested in his unraveling. I sat back and let the moment breathe. I had my proof, my inbox receipts, my red confirmations, and the small army of contacts who'd validated the materials. What I didn't have, and what I didn't want yet, was the final act. I wanted him to watch the first rip in his life widen, to feel the slow, cold slide of reality removing applause. I wanted him to understand that some things can't be reclaimed with charm. He opened his mouth again, this time with something sharper. "You'll regret this," he said, voice low and dangerous. I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "Maybe," I said, "but probably not." And then the man in the sharp suit rose from his table and began to walk toward us, striding with a confidence that made everyone at our table look up. He paused at the edge of our group, leaned in slightly, and said something that made Max's face go completely still. "That's my client," the man said to Max, in a tone that carried all the world's ability to end careers. Max looked at me, then at the man, then at the phone sitting between us. I could see him measuring whether his next move would be a denial, a lie, or an outright attempt at salvage. The waiter cleared his throat, the restaurant china chimed, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one laughing last. I was the one who'd made sure the punchline landed where it mattered. And as Max's mouth opened, about to speak to the man who might be the most consequential person in the room that night, the story teetered. Everything I had worked for led to this fragile, electric second, and then the words came out of him in a way none of us expected. The sharp-suited man cleared his throat, and Max froze mid-word. The room's energy shifted instantly, everyone sensing the tension, not the usual dramatic flair Max tried to command, but something heavier, more concrete. He looked from the man to me, and then back down at the table as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "This is my client," the man repeated, with a finality that made Max's confident veneer crumble. "You've presented work that is substantially identical to another designer's project. Before we move forward, legal and compliance will need to review everything." Max's face drained of color. The kind of color that doesn't come back until after the embarrassment fades, if it ever does. His voice cracked slightly when he finally spoke. I don't understand. I did my work. You didn't," the man cut in. "You adapted someone else's project without permission or attribution. That's not interpretation or inspiration. That's replication. Our company takes intellectual property very seriously." I sat quietly, sipping my water, letting the words settle. My parents were slack-jawed, their favorite successful son unraveling in front of everyone they'd ever praised. Olivia's hand trembled on the edge of the table, like she'd lost her tether to Max's charm. Max himself looked like a man grappling with gravity for the first time in his life. No smirk, no jokes, no deflection. The fallout began immediately. Max's phone rang incessantly, his boss, HR, legal counsel, all making arrangements to review his actions. Each time it buzzed, his hands shook slightly. I noticed the subtle shift in the restaurant staff. Even the waiter, who had served us for years, glanced at Max differently, eyes betraying that tiny human satisfaction at seeing the truth surface. "What do you mean you sent them to my company?" Max asked finally, voice low, sharp, but tinged with panic. "I sent them to ensure the people who were giving you credit had the full picture." I replied evenly, meeting his gaze. "If you're confident in your work, prove it. If not, well, now they'll find out for themselves." Mom gasped softly, trying to intervene. "Harry, you didn't have to." "I did," I said. "I didn't do this to humiliate anyone. I did this because honesty matters. And because Max's choices forced my hand." Max's head dropped slightly. The weight of the situation had stripped him of his usual bluster. For years, he'd relied on charm, timing, and the protective halo of parental favoritism to navigate every awkward or incriminating moment. That armor had just shattered, and he knew it. By the end of the evening, legal teams had been contacted, audits scheduled, and Max had already received his first emails from compliance requesting detailed documentation. He could try to spin it, but the combination of the evidence I provided and the timing of my reveal left him no room for theatrics. His credibility, the thing he had relied on more than his actual skills, had been compromised. The ride home was quiet, thick with tension. Max didn't speak, and for once, he didn't look at me with the triumphant arrogance I had endured for years. He stared out the window, hands clenched in his lap. Mom muttered something under her breath about overreactions, but even she didn't meet my eyes. Olivia was silent, her expression unreadable, though I could feel her reassessing her allegiance. In the days that followed, the dominoes continued to fall. Max's company placed his recent promotion on hold pending review. Internal communications were flooded with inquiries about the work I had highlighted. Even colleagues who had once casually praised him began asking questions, quietly, without drama. Reputation, I realized, was fragile when unearned. At home, the atmosphere shifted. My parents avoided the topic, though their glances betrayed the tension. Olivia stopped making little comments to me, and Max, well, he stopped altogether. He no longer assumed I was the one who would always be small, the one who would smile politely while he collected applause. I didn't gloat. There was no need. Watching him navigate the consequences of his own choices, the way his world began to recalibrate around a truth he hadn't considered, was more satisfying than any dramatic display of revenge. I had acted precisely, calmly, and smartly. I had reclaimed control without losing my own integrity. Weeks later, the final confirmation came. Max's involvement in the client project was officially noted as problematic. HR sent a report that would remain in his professional file, a quiet but enduring reminder of accountability. He had to attend a series of meetings, explain his decisions, and face a professional reality he had never prepared for. Meanwhile, my reputation in my field quietly skyrocketed. The people who had received my evidence recognized my integrity and skill. Opportunities multiplied, clients trusted me implicitly, and the network I had built became a self-reinforcing engine of success. When I walked past Max at the next family gathering, he looked at me differently. There was no smirk, no casual superiority, just a measured wariness. He tried to speak, to reclaim some narrative, but I gave him a polite nod and moved on. That was enough. He couldn't provoke me, couldn't belittle me, couldn't control me anymore. And in that quiet, subtle power, I felt a release I hadn't known existed for years. Not vindictive, not triumphant in a loud sense, just complete. I had been laughed at, mocked, and underestimated for years. I had been the one who still hasn't figured life out. Now, the balance had shifted. The people who once assumed I would always be the background character were forced to recognize my presence, my skill, and my agency. Max had learned that actions have consequences, and I had learned that patient, careful planning can turn years of frustration into undeniable results. I didn't need anyone to cheer. I didn't need a toast. I just needed the quiet satisfaction of knowing the truth had been revealed, and that for the first time, the room and my life belonged to me. And as I left the family gathering that evening, shoulders straight, mind clear, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in years. I had finally figured life out on my own terms.